Okay, so Surge 1.8. It's had a good few features added to it recently, so I said I'd run through pretty much everything in detail. It's probably one of the best synths that you can get, paid or not paid. It happens to be free, but that doesn't matter. It's still probably one of the best ones out there. So one of the things about Surge is it's capable of doing so much, and it's actually laid out very well. So the GUI is actually really good for the amount that it does, but it'd be kind of daunting the first time you look at it. You're kind of like, oh god, what's this and what's that and what's all this and what are all these modes and stuff like that. So we're going to go through everything in detail and realize that it's not really that complicated, and then you're going to be programming the best sounds anyone's ever heard on a free synth, and it's going to be huge. So let's start. So the first thing to be familiar with in Surge is you've got two scenes here. You've got scene A and scene B. Scene A and scene B are essentially two different presets, but they exist sort of within the same patch. So I can change parameters here on scene A, and I can change parameters here on scene B, and they're separate. Then we've got a mode which basically distinguishes how they're going to be used together. So single, I'm either on scene A or scene B. I'll just change something so you can hear a difference. Let me just give that a bit of volume there. So scene A, scene B, and then I can copy between them. So if I right click on here, I can copy it and then I could paste it onto scene B. Or we can have them programmed completely differently, whichever you would like to do. Then you've got the mode here. So on single, as I just showed, it's either A or B. On key split, we set a key here, so somewhere on your keyboard, and then above that will be scene A and below it will be scene B. So you can have multiple presets on one keyboard. Then you've got a channel split, which will let you split it by MIDI channel, and then you've got dual, which will mean they'll just play together. Probably not the best example there, but both of them are there. So let's just stick with one scene for a second and we'll go more into that. Just before I move on to something else though, it is worth noting that scene A and scene B have their own independent effects lane here. So you can see here in the effects routing, scene A goes through its own effects, scene B goes through its own effects, then they've got a send effect that they share, and then they go to the output effects, which are put on both of them. And that's pretty much it. So you've got polyphony here. You can drag up on this to set more or less polyphony. You've got preset browser here, which if you click on that, you can browse through all of the presets that are included. One of the most useful ones in here is there are some templates that will get you started with different things, but we'll have a look at those in a second. You can also browse them with the arrows here. So there's like a category and there's a patch. Then there's store, which will save your current preset as a new preset, and you can name it and write a cool comment or whatever you want to do. Then we have status here, which is MPE. So you can, if you've got an MPE controller, you can turn that on and then it will accept MPE messages. You've got tune, which will let you load up tuning files if you want to play, with A set to a different frequency, or if you want to put some kind of different tuning on, like say you're trying to make Middle Eastern music or something like that, you might want to put a different tuning on. Then you got zoom, which will give you quick access to different sizes for the GUI. So we could set it to 150% here, but you can also drag it here independently and size it whichever way you might like to size it, and that'll work. Let's just make it a bit bigger than that. So after that, you've got bypass and character section. So what bypass does is it will bypass certain parts of the effects chain here. So we can bypass the sends, which will turn off the sends, which I'll go into in a second. We can turn off sends and global, which will turn off these two effects at the end, which go on both, and also the sends. Or we can turn off everything, which will bypass all the effects in the effects section, so you can just listen to the synth. Then we have three settings here for basically the character of the synth. So it changes the way that it sounds. So in neutral, let me just let's just switch back to single mode there. So neutral is I suppose neutral. Then you've got warm, which is slightly less bright. And you've got bright, which is slightly more bright. And that's pretty much it for the top panel. Then you've got an output section here, which is a global volume. And that will, of course, control the volume of both A and B. Then you've got an oscillator section here, just as a quick overview. I'll go in depth in the oscillator section in a second. Then you've got this basically settings for how your voices and stuff are handled. There's oscillator drift and noise color in here as well. There's FM routing, filter configuration. Then there's scene output. So this is send into the effects, stuff like that. Things like how the scene itself is panned. So whether you're on A or B, which way that's panned. There's an actual mixer for the oscillators and the noise, and also these ring modulation outs. Then there's a key track for the filters here. High pass for the filter. You've got your first filter here. You've got a mix between the two filters here. Then you've got a second filter here. Here's the envelope for the filter. And here's the envelope for the overall scene. So the amplitude envelope. So we will start with the oscillator. You've got 3 oscillators here. So 1, 2, and 3. And there's a little graph here, which will show you what the oscillator currently looks like, depending on the settings that you change. You can key track the oscillator or turn it off. So if I hit different keys, it just plays the same thing. You might want that for drums or something. Retrigger, which retriggers the phase of the oscillator every time you hit a new key. And then you've got an octave setting here. And you've got an oscillator mode selection. So this will select the various different oscillator modes, but we will get back to that in a second. We'll stick with classic for a second. So on classic, you've got a control here for the pitch. So that's up or down. By default, it's, and by the way, you just double click to reset something. By default, it will let you go up 7 semitones or down 7 semitones. If you'd like to extend that, you can go here to extend range. And that'll let you go all the way up to 84 semitones and all the way down to 84 semitones. Then you've got a shape control here. In the case of the classic oscillator, this will basically just switch between a square wave and then sort of an octave of the original saw wave. You've got a pulse width here, which will do nothing on a saw. Let me just turn that down a bit. I think it's a bit loud. It will do nothing on a saw, and it will control the pulse width of a square wave. You got a secondary pulse width here, which does slightly different pulse shaping. Then here you've got a submix, which will bring in a sub oscillator. So then we've got sync, which will sync, and that will work, of course, on all. By the way, if you have a saw wave here and you bring in the sub, it's still a square wave. It's just puts a square wave underneath it. Then, yeah, you've got sync, which is basic sync effect. You've got unison detune here, which controls how detuned your unison voices are. And then you've got the number of unison voices, which is up to 16. And you can get pretty detuney there. You can also extend the range of this to make it insane. But you cannot extend the range of this, but you can select if you want the number of voices that you want here. So let's unextend that range. Now, the other thing you might want to have a look at here is every time you don't understand a control, if you right click on it, there's a little question mark up here, and that will take you to the manual where you can read about it. You can also map it to a controller or key. You can add an automation lane for it and set it to its default value, which you can also do by double clicking. So that pretty much covers the classic oscillator here. So you've got both the sawtooth and the square. The only difference between these two is it's a preset. It starts you in a different part of this shape. So yeah, not really sure why they included it as a different mode, but it's there. So if you need to use it, it's there. Next, you've got wavetable, which is, as I'm sure you're aware, a wavetable. So you got a bunch of wavetables in here. Some of them are weird. This is a kick, or a blip sound. Then you've got some rhythmatic ones in here. And you've got a bunch of, you know, just a bunch of cool wavetables, including some by Venus Theory, which I think were done on his Novation Peak, so pretty cool. Then you control the pitch once again here. Let's actually take the extended range off that. You've got morph here, so you can morph through the wavetable as you see fit. Skew vertical is it's easier to see on some other wavetables. Sorry. So basically it kind of moves the wavetable along the zero crossing. Then saturate will kind of saturate the wave, so it'll kind of square it off. And formant will change the formant here. Then you've got skew horizontal, which is the opposite of this skew vertical. So let's pull that formant down. And you can, you know, mix those together. Then you've got the unison, which is the exact same as the unison on the last one. So you've got a lot of shaping potential here, where you can take, you know, any kind of a wavetable here, and then you can shape it to be totally different between all the different controls. So the next one here is window. So window is basically wavetable 2. It's sort of like the wavetable in that you select a wavetable here, and then you can morph through it, and you can change format and stuff like that. But it's also got this extra window control, which basically windows the amplitude of the wavetable by one of these waves. So it's kind of, it's sort of a unique one, but then once you've got it windowed, you can play around with this formant control. And get loads of cool sounds. So it's like, it's sort of like a type of what you would get in the oscillators in Serum, where you can kind of set up a window and then you can warp the wave around that. It's just an extra way of warping the wavetable. Let's move on to the sine wave here. So the sine wave is basically set up so that you start initially with a sine wave, and then you can move through these kind of variations, which are modeled on sort of TX waveforms, which are used a lot in FM. So this is a particularly good oscillator to use in FM if you're feeding oscillators into each other here in this FM routing window. You can also feed it back into itself. And then you've got a low cut and a high cut on it here, which you need to activate. So it's a good way if you are playing with these FM algorithms and you're using the 3 oscillators to FM each other. It's a good way of kind of shaping a sound that works well for FM. You've also got FM behavior here, which means that it either acts like it acted in 1.6.2, or it acts like it acts in these other FM algorithms here. So it sounds consistent when you're using, so if you're using the FM routing over here, it will sound similar to how it sounds when you use these ones here in the oscillator tab. So the next one we've got here is FM2. FM2 will basically start you off with a sine wave here, and then you've got 2 other oscillators that you can FM this oscillator with. So you've got the first modulator's amount here, and then you've got its ratio. So if I pull this up, it's setting its ratio with respect to the first oscillator. Then you've got the second modulator here, and you've also got its ratio. then the relationship between those, of course, will change the sound pretty drastically. So then you've got the offset, which is how detuned they are, so you can detune them in hertz here. Then you've got the phases, so that would be kind of a subtler change to the sound as well. And then you've got a feedback, which will feed it back into itself. So next we have FM3. FM3 is very similar to FM2, except it's got 3 oscillators, and the oscillators have a much wider range. So if we modulate by this first modulator, you can see, let me just turn that down a bit. You can modulate way up into nearly audio rate. And you can do that with all of these. So it's a good way of getting like really noisy metallic sounds or percussion or stuff like that. You can also extend the range of these where they start here at LFO rate and they go all the way up, way into the audio rate. So yeah, that's FM3. Then you've got sample and hold noise, which is basically a noise generator. So you've got this correlation here, which seems to set, it's sort of like a lo-fi thing where it sets how much of the samples are playing in the sample and hold. Then you've got a width here, which will set the width of that. You've got a sync. And then you've got filters. So the pitch will affect drastically how the noise sounds. And then once you're down in these lower pitches, you're much more into sample and hold territory. And then you kind of set the randomness of that with this correlation here. You can also set the pulse width. This also has a unison detune if you want to make it stereo. And a sync. So the last one is audio input. I'm not going to go into this too much because it will depend on the DAW you're using and how you set this up. But basically what this is it will allow you to route audio into Surge, which you can use with things like the vocoder, or you can even just route the audio signal through Surge, through its filters and all of that, and you can use all the modulators and stuff on it. So basically turns the synth into an effect unit. The next thing here is the poly mode. The play mode. The play mode here basically deals with how the notes are dealt with. So poly will allow you to play multiple notes. Let's just get an oscillator up here so we can hear. And let me bring the octave up. So on poly you can play multiple notes. Then in mono, it's just going to be one note. And then in mono single trigger, what this is going to do is in normal mono, it will restart all the envelopes. So the easiest way to see this is if I put, say, a filter on here. Let's just put the ladder filter on and let's modulate that. Let's send the envelope here to this cutoff. Let's make it sort of reasonably long. So if I were to play in mono, every time I play a new note, it's going to reset that. Whereas if I leave this on, the mono single trigger, the ST here, even if I hold the first note down, it's going to continue the envelope instead of restarting it. Then you've got this mono FP here. I forget what FP stands for. I think it's, fingered portamento. So that basically will make it so that the portamento, which is set down here, will only work if the notes overlap. So if I play the notes and leave a space between them, there's no portamento. And then if I hold down the first note, the portamento is active, whereas on just regular mono here, it doesn't matter whether I'm holding on the note or if there's a space between them, it will always, that portamento will always happen. Then you've got ST and FP, which is a combination of these two where it's mono, and if you hold it down, the portamento works, and also it will keep the envelope going instead of restarting it. Then you've got latch, which will hold the last note that you put down. So I'm just hitting these keys and releasing them immediately. And it just holds that note down, and it will hold it forever. So if I set this envelope to be really long, it doesn't matter how long it is, that will just hold until I hit another note. So yeah, that's that. Let's go back to the default template here. Just wanted to show you while we're doing that. If you come in here into templates, there's some templates to get you started quickly. So you can have wavetable oscillators from the start, or you can have it set up for FM, or if you're trying to do physical modeling stuff, you can have it set up like that, or you could just have it set up with a basic saw like this. So the next thing we've got is oscillator drift, which will cause the oscillator to drift in and out of pitch a small amount, kind of emulating an analog oscillator. So you can't hear any difference and the reason that you can't hear any difference is because the only oscillator I've got on at the moment is 1. But if I turn on the other 2 oscillators here, so we've got 1, 2, and 3 active now, and I pull this up, you'll hear now. And as we come down, it gets more and more stable. Noise color, I'll just turn on the noise now, so let's mute all the oscillators and bring on the noise in the mixer section down here. Noise color will set the color of the noise. So that's darker, and up here is brighter. Sort of like a bandpass filter on the noise. Then you have, let me just turn on the first oscillator again. So now you've got the scene pitch, which instead of in here where the pitch is controlled individually for each oscillator, so these octaves are set for each oscillator. So let me just activate them. So we can set oscillator 3 to 2, and then we could set oscillator 2 to -1. This scene control here is doing the whole lot. And that's pretty much everything that happens in here, is controlling everything in the scene. So let's just mute the other oscillators there and go back to 1, and then we've got a pitch slider as well. So we've got a pitch slider for the entire A preset, but it doesn't affect the B preset here. You can also extend the range of this pitch. Instead of just having 770 tones, you can have a pretty much all you'd ever want there. So let's put that back to normal. And then you've got your portamento control, as I showed here, which is glide. So basically a glide between the notes. Then you've got the mixer section here. So a mixer is, you've got oscillator 1, 2, and 3, and you've got levels for those. So then you've got these kind of weird ones, which are ring modulators. And ring modulation is similar to FM, but instead of frequency, it adjusts amplitude. So oscillator 2 is, instead of modulating the phase or the frequency of oscillator 1, it's modulating its amplitude. So we've just got that active here. And you can hear, as I change the relationship between these two, let's change this to a different oscillator type, it's going to drastically change the sound. Or we can change the octave here, or way down. And let's even extend the range of this pitch here. So, and you can hear the whole spectrum there. And basically the wavetable, if you go to a wavetable here per se, and we go to something weird, let's go to one of these, I guess. So you got one of those for 2 and 1, you've got one of those for 2 and 3, and you can mix those in with the original signal. So we've got oscillator 1 here going. Sorry, it's muted. And then we can mix in the signal. So yeah, that's that. Then the final one here you've got is noise, and this will just bring in the noise, which again you control the color of up here. And that's pretty much it. Let's go back to that initialized preset in here in the templates. And this time let's go to a sine wave. So that will give oscillator 1 as a sine. And we'll move on to this FM routing here. So you can do FM within the FM oscillator here that I showed you earlier, so FM2 and FM3, but you can also do FM between the oscillators, and the way that you do that is in here with this routing. So by default there's no FM, and then if you select this second one here, then oscillator 2 is going to FM oscillator 1, and of course we can change, say, to a wavetable here, and we can maybe change, let's bring it down an octave, and let's add in some of these effects here. Now we've got this. Or we can bring it way up. So yeah, that's FM there. Just a quick note on FM. If you've got it on classic mode here, it won't work. As expected, it will just do that. You need to have it on one of these sine types. So it will work on the FM one here as well. So that'll work. And sine here will work, so you can use the different sine waves. And so will FM3 here. But it won't work on the classic mode. The only difference between this third mode here, let's set back to that regular sine again. So the only difference on this third mode here, sorry, is that it's oscillator 3 is FM and oscillator 2, which is then FM and oscillator 1. So if we switch all of these to this sine here, so let's pick that there and sine here, then as we bring this up, let's set that to a lower octave, and then let's set this one to higher, and then we'll set this one really high. And then we could change the, say we'd change oscillator 3 here to one of these. And we can create a pretty complex FM shape in there. So really you can have sort of a massive amount of operators here, because what you can do is, if you go to your sine wave here, let's set them all to actually this FM2. So if you set FM2 there, FM2 there, and FM2 there, now, and you set it to this, right? Now you've got oscillator 1, which has a sine wave, and then it can be modulated by 2 other sine waves, which can be modulated by oscillator 2, which has a sine wave modulated by 2 other sine waves, and then oscillator 3, which also has a sine wave being modulated by 2 other sine waves. The third mode here is basically, instead of 3 operating on, or instead of 3 FMing operator 2 here, it's going to FM oscillator 1. So they're both FM in the same thing. So it's just a different sound. So now let's just go back to the template here. So we're just going to go to the saw, and then the next section here is the filter section, but I'm just going to skip this filter configuration for a second and just go to the filters first. So the filters here, you've got a bunch of modes in here. You've got ladder filters, and you've got other ones that are based on real synths, like the OBXD and the K35, which I think is based on like an MS-20 or something like that. Then you've got some weird ones here, like a resonance warp. But they all sound quite different. This OBXD one sounds really good. You got some other modes in here, so you've got, you know, high pass, and those have some of the same models in them. You got a band pass, you got notch filters. Then you've got these effect filters, which are mainly all pass filters and comb filters, as well as sample and hold. And you've you've got comb here as well if you want to do some physical modeling and stuff like that, and all pass filters, which are basically like a modulated delay. Then you have whether or not the filter is key track in here, so you can key track filter 1 or filter 2. You can add a high pass filter on top of the two of them, and you've got a wave shaper here, which is basically just a distortion. And you got some different modes for that. And let's pass one of the filters through that then. Let's pass the tape. So that's the filter. Then there's a second filter here over just past. This is the mix between them, and this is the second filter. It has all the same modes in it. The only difference is it doesn't have this wave shaper part down here at the bottom, because that is either on one filter or on both of the filters, which we'll set up here in the filter configuration now in a second. So yeah, that's basically the filters. On filter 2 there's a couple of other controls. So you've got an offset from filter 1. So this is, let's set them both to low pass here, so both to like 12 dB. And we can also link the resonance, so we can have the resonance of filter 2, which I haven't set yet. We can have the resonance of filter 2 be linked to the resonance of filter 1, so as I change it, it's changing both. Now, when this offset setting is set here, what that's actually doing is it's making it so that filter 1 here is controlling both cutoffs, but then the offset controls the difference between the two of them, so we can have filter 2 here be higher up than filter 1 is. So yeah, that's the filters, and then we should just have a look at the filter routing here. So the filter configuration is just allowing you to route these two filters differently. So on the first view that we've got our serial, where filter 1 will go into the shaper here. So on this first one, filter 1 is going into the shaper, which is this wave shaper. Then that's going into filter 2, which is over here. And then that's going to the amplitude envelope. And then that's going to the high pass filter. So we add the high pass filter at the end. Then you've got this one here, which is the same thing, but it's also adding in some feedback. So we can now feed the signal from these filters back into the start. So let's pull down that resonance a bit. So the feedback's kind of going to distort it more. Let's put on a ladder filter there. Let's actually turn off filter 2 for now. So you can see as you pull back here, it's going to become more and more resonant, and then as you pull up here, it's going to become more and more driven. And if you're not careful, then it will just turn off. So you need to be careful with it. If you set like ridiculous resonance and then you set like pretty high feedback, you're going to have, you know, a lot of distortion and probably audio cutting out and stuff like that. But basically you can use the feedback to make the sound of the filter more distorted. The next thing, let's just pull that feedback back to normal there. The next one you've got here is a similar thing, but so you're going through filter 1, then you're going through the shaper, and then that's going back into filter 2, which is then being fed back to the start. So we can add in filter 2 here. Let's actually pull the octave down here. So that's filter 2 and that's filter 1. So you can hear, you can get really distorted sound with the feedback there. Then we've got these ones, which are where the filters are being done in parallel. So instead of being processed one after the other, the oscillators are going through both filters at the same time, and then both of them are going through the shaper. Actually, the shaper is going to affect a lot of the feedback sound, so it's probably best to have that off while I'm showing you. So that's how this first one that works, that puts them through in parallel. Then the second one here is parallel, but only one of the filters gets the shaper. So filter 1 is going to be through the shaper, and then filter 2 is just going to be a regular filter that doesn't pass through the shaper module. Then you've got left and right, which turns the filters into stereo filters. So let's balance them out here. That's actually, I think filter 1's it's a bit quieter than. So you can hear here as I move let me just turn that up a bit. As I move the offset here, the filter is actually in stereo. So on the left and right channels, you're getting a different cutoff amount, which is pretty cool. Then you've got a couple more modes here, which are more advanced routings for ring modulation effect. So let's turn that up there. Probably want to give the whole thing a bit more volume because it kind of makes it quieter. Let me pull that down a bit there. Sorry, when you're messing with feedback, the volumes can kind of get a bit unruly, so I'm just adjusting it there to make sure that you can hear it. So what this is doing is it's taking the filters and then it's feeding back, but it's using it as a ring modulator. So let's pull the resonance way up here, and that'll probably let you hear it pretty well. So you can hear as I move the part where the resonance is on the second filter, it's having sort of a ring modulation effect. And so yeah, that's pretty much all the controls for the filter. So that routing section can be a bit confusing. So basically it's just setting up the way that the filters are interacting with each other, and then things like stereo and ring mod and stuff like that. Let's go back to the default saw wave here. So the next thing we've got here is just the scene output. So that's volume for the entire scene here, and then panning for the scene. So you can pan the A and B scenes differently and then have them both playing. Then you've got width, which you've got to if you've got to have a wide signal for that to actually be doing anything. We're just playing a mono thing here at the moment, but basically as you drag it up here, it's going to be wider, and as you drag it down, it's going to be more mono sounding. This is of course just one saw wave, so it's pretty mono as is. Then you've got send effects level, which is how much we are sending to the send effects. I'll get into that when I come to the effects section. And that's pretty much it for this main synth window area here. The only other thing we've got are the filter envelope, which controls the filter, and you can send that. So let's send the mix here. So this is a mix, so right now it's 50% oscillator 2 and 50% oscillator 1. So let's switch that all the way over to oscillator 1, or not oscillator 1, sorry, filter 1. So now it's 100%, we're hearing filter 1. Let's switch that to a low pass. So let's say we've got it down here and we want to control it with this envelope generator. We just simply send the envelope generator here to oscillator, or to filter 1, sorry. and then we can control that here. So the digital and analog are just different ways that the curve structure is set up here. You can control them individually by dragging these bars, and that will set how steep the curves are for all of the different stages. And then analog is kind of I guess a smoother sort of a filter, or a smoother sort of an envelope, and digital is much more of a straight. So you've got those two modes there for both the filter and the actual full-on amplitude envelope. So it's pretty subtle, the difference between those two shapes for the envelope, but it does make a big difference with certain sounds like plucks and stuff like that. Then, just before we get on to effects, we are going to go through the modulators here. So these are just ways of modulating your signal. It looks like there's a whole ton of crazy stuff going on here, but actually pretty much all of this section are the same thing. It's just basically just these can be changed to be the same thing. They could be all envelopes, or they could be all LFOs. But let's start with the key stuff. So you can, first of all, you've got macros up here. So you've got, how many is there? 7, 8. So you've got these macros. And the way that you assign stuff is once you've clicked on it, you just click it again, and then everything will turn green, and you can assign it to, so you could assign velocity here to, you know, the volume of oscillator 1 or whatever you want to pick out here. And then you can unassign it by just double clicking it, and that will unassign whatever you've done there. So now once you've assigned something, this macro will be named. So if I were to assign this to something else first, say the key track here, it's going to be called key track, and then you can control it by sliding up and down here. The next thing you got here is velocity. This will let you map any of these things to velocity. So, you know, the harder you play, the more pitch you're going to have, or the more filter you're going to have, and the softer you play, the lower it's going to be. Release velocity is release velocity when you pull off the key. It's the same thing, except it's to do with how you're coming off the key. Polyphonic aftertouch and normal aftertouch. Polyphonic aftertouch is only available on some keyboards, and basically it's when you push and hold down on the key, it will control whichever parameters you've set it up to. And channel aftertouch is just regular aftertouch, where it's not polyphonic. It's only on the entire on the entire channel. So then you've got pitch bend. So as you pitch bend, which you can set up here for as many as you want, 24 or down 24, you can also set up a modulator that comes in then. So say when you're pitch bending up, maybe you increase the filter, or you decrease the filter, or you increase the distortion, or whatever. Then you've got mod wheel, which is the mod wheel on your keyboard. You can map that to whatever you want. Then you've got some more advanced things like breadth, an expression pedal if you've got an expression pedal, sustain if you've got a sustain pedal, timbre, which is to do with MPE if you've got an MPE controller. And then you have got some other stuff here that's kind of baked in. So we've got key track, so that will, as you play higher up the keyboard, it will increase whatever you've set it to. So you could set it here to the decay, and as you move up the keyboard and play higher notes, the decay would increase. Lowest key, highest key, and latest key are to do with which one it key tracks. So key track will just key track whichever note you've got played, but if you're playing chords, you might want to select which key in the chord is actually controlling the key track. And so with lowest key, it's going to be the lowest key you've played is going to be what the key tracking is based on. With latest key, it's going to be whatever the last key you played. And with highest key, it's going to be the highest note. Now, finally, just to look into these LFOs here. So let me just take the modulation off here. Okay, so finally we have the LFO modulators here and the SLFO. What is the difference between an LFO and an SLFO? SLFO means scene LFO, and these regular LFOs are voice LFOs, which means that they are per voice. So if you're playing a chord, let me just attach it to something here, like probably the filter cut off. So let's select low pass here, and let's just hear all filter 1. So on this LFO here, if I attach this to the cutoff, if I add another note here, you can hear each node is getting its own LFO. So each node is independently being put through the filter and is independently getting its own cutoff. Now, if I send it to this S LFO here, what's happening is this LFO is just over the whole scene. It's not per voice or per note. So I'll hit these notes all at different times, but they're all going to still have the same LFO on the cutoff. And that's basically it. That's the only difference between them. But you would want certain ones for certain things. There are certain times you'd want per voice, and there's certain times that you would not. So let's turn off that modulation. Actually, let's first of all turn that off, and let's also just turn off the filter for a second. So the thing about these LFOs is it says that the LFO here is an LFO, but it's actually a lot more than an LFO. There's a bunch of different modes that you can select in here that basically turn it into any type of modulator, and you've got a ton of these. So you've got 5 of these regular LFOs and 5 of these scene LFOs. So let's get into the controls. It looks like there's a lot there, but really these are the exact same thing. There's no difference between these other than the way that they interact with voices. So we just have to take a look at one of them. First of all, we've got the rate. Let's attach it to something like pitch. If that's oscillator 3, that's not going to hear anything there. So you can hear on here on the oscillator 1, I'm controlling the pitch. So if I turn the rate up, and then rate down, so you've got a rate control there. You've got a phase, which is where it starts. You've got deform, which will let you kind of change the shape of the wave that you've got in here. Then you've got the amplitude, which is how much it's affecting it. Then you've got a few controls here for how it is controlled. So this is basically controlling how it starts. So on free run, it will just continue to run in the background as an LFO, and whenever you hit a key, you'll just come in at whatever it is. On key trigger, every time that you hit the key, the LFO is going to be restart from the very start. And random is each time you hit a key, it's going to start the LFO from a random part of the wave here. So a random part of this LFO, it's just going to start at a random time every time you hit a key. Unipolar or bipolar is whether it just goes up, and then bipolar is up and down. So if I set it to unipolar, the pitch only goes up, and if I set it to bipolar, the pitch goes up and down. So that's that. You got a couple of shapes here. So you've got the triangle as well as the sine, and you can change the shape of this as well. You got square, which you can change the pulse width of, and you got a saw, which you can change sort of how the tension of the saw curve there. Okay, so after the regular LFOs here, I just wanted to mention that you actually can bring in a envelope on top of this. So here we've got a random modulator, but we can actually add an attack here and say decay, so that it raises over time and then goes down. So you can hear it's going up, and then towards the end it's coming down to the point where there's no modulation at all. That's the same for all of these. So, you know, the square wave here has it as well. So yeah, there's an envelope that can control each of them. So let's just, for now, let's turn that off. And let's move on to this random modulator here. So this first random modulator is just creating a random LFO. And basically the difference between these two is that the first one here is a smooth one. So it's kind of gliding between each value. So let's turn up the resonance and make it easier to hear. So it's just randomly gliding up and down through the cutoff. Then you've got this square one, which is doing the same thing, but it's not gliding through them. It's just jumping from one value to another. And these can be deformed and stuff as well. And it kind of turns them into more of a, I suppose, a noisier signal. And you can also control the amplitude and the rate, the same as on the regular ones. Then next here you've got just a regular envelope. So this is your regular ADSR. Let's introduce a bit of attack here. Let's pull down this hold. So you can hear here, it's got an attack phase where it's going up. And then it's going back down the decay until it gets to this release, this sustain value here. Let's pull in that decay a bit. Let's pull in the attack here. So we've got a pretty regular looking ADSR shape there. So you've got the attack phase, then the decay, and then you've also got a hold in here, so that will hold it for a certain amount of time. Once it gets to the top of the attack, then it'll go down, and then it'll hold at that sustain value until we release the note. Then you can deform that as well, which is just going to change up the curves, so making it kind of steeper or less steep, I suppose. And then you've got a steps modulator here. So let's take off this ADSR and just leave it so that it's just a straight one here. And let's switch that deform back to regular. So this just lets you draw in your own steps. Let's turn up the rate a bit. So similar to this first random modulator, except you control yourself where you want the steps to be. And you can deform that as well to make it smoother. So yeah, that's the steps one. The final one we have here is the MSEG. The MSEG basically will allow you to create as many points as you want and draw whatever kind of shapes you want. You also have loop regions in here where you can set it up to loop certain points over and over again, and then as you increase the speed, those points will basically infinitely go. There's a couple of functions in here in the actions menu that you can do where you can, I'll show you now, you can do things like double the duration, or you can flip it horizontally or vertically and do stuff like that. You can also quantize it and stuff like that. You can create these kind of different presets in here just by right clicking, and you also can just set it to default at any time that you want. There's also some presets in here for envelopes and MSEGs and stuff that you can go through, and they have all these kind of preset shapes in here. One of the cool things you can do with it is sort of like in FL Studio. If you've ever used FL Studio, you can have these really complex curves where, you know, you've got normal ones sort of like this, and then you've got ones that are like S curves where you can go like that or that. And you've got things like sine waves, so as you increase the curve, you'll be adding more or less sine waves in there as well. And yeah, that's basically all the controls for the MSEG. This still has like all the stuff in it for like attack and decay, so you can slowly bring in the MSEG over time, and then you could hold it for a while and then bring it down over time and have a release value on it. And that's pretty much it. You've got the deformers here as well, so you can kind of change the way that these curves are set with this deform, or if you've got square waves in there, it will change the pulse width of them. And that's pretty much it for the modulators. Yeah, that's basically the modulators covered. So the last thing here really is just the effects, and then just in the menu here, there's a few things that you might want to change. So there's things like skins. You can change it to this Royal Surge skin, which is a new one that they've added, which is fairly cool, kind of like retro and futuristic at the same time. And then you've got the original one, the Surge Classic one, which isn't the greatest. And you have, it's very colorful. And then you've got this one here, which is the dark one, which is the one that I use most of the time. And then finally we get to the effects. So here on the effects, you have a bunch of different options. You can oh yeah, sorry, just one thing I meant to cover before I go into the effects. The random and the alternate modulator here. So these are to do with when you hit a key. So with the random one here, every time I hit a key, it will select a random value between these two values that I've set here. So I'll set it on the pitch, probably easier. So every time I'm hitting a new key, it's giving me a random value that I've set there, or between those values that I've set there. So if I reset these and then I hit alternate, it will just alternate between the two most extreme values. And those are the last two modulators that you need to worry about. Then the effects, I'm not going to go too into detail. The effects are plentiful, and a lot of the time they're kind of self-explanatory, so I don't really need to go into too much detail. One thing I will say is if you're using a send effect, so let's say you're using a reverb here, first of all, these aren't different reverbs. These are just presets for, you know, reverb 1 and reverb 2, just in case you thought they were different. But I've got that set in the effects here, and you can't hear it even though the returns come up. So what you've got to do is you've got to set the send effects over here, and that will send it to this middle part. And now we're getting the reverb through. So they all have their various controls, the effects in here. I'm not going to go through them because the controls are kind of the same. I mean, if you know the controls that are in a chorus, you kind of will have an understanding of you know, the effects in here and what they do. There's a couple of interesting things to mention though. First of all, they've got the full Air Windows suite of stuff in here, so you've got like loads of different there's like an ambience effect here. They have different like lo-fi and noise, and they've got their own filter stuff going on in here. There's saturation, and I think there's some kind of resonators and yeah, there's just loads of stuff in there. It would take probably about 3 hours to go through absolutely everything that's in here. There's a bunch of distortions and stuff like that. What I'm going to go through mainly is how you actually use them within the effects section. So first of all, you've got your two sends here, which are controlled here. Then you've got the effects for each scene. So scene A goes through these two effects, and scene B goes through these two effects. And the sum of all of those things, including the return here, by the way, will just turn down the amount of this effect that's coming back. And then the sum of all those things will go to the final two effects here, which are, you know, whatever you set, and that will go on both of them. So, you know, you could put, say, a distortion on the end or something like that. It's probably not what you'd actually put on the end, but for the sake of example, that's what we're going to do. Let me turn that down. And the other thing you can do is you can drag these around and change their where they are. So you could drag the chorus down here into the send effects, or over here onto the B channel. And I think that's pretty much it. It's not too complicated, the effects. You've got a whole bunch to choose from. There is a separate effects plugin here that comes with it. So let's just have a look at that. So there's a Surge effects bank. And this will give you all of the effects that are included here, including the Air Windows ones, which you can select here with the type. And you can use them anywhere. You can also route audio to the track that Surge is on, and you can use the audio input here and in stereo, and then that will bring audio in here, and you can use things like the vocoder, and you know, you can use the reverbs that are in here, the Air Windows effects, and the filters. Anyway, I think that is pretty much everything explained. Hopefully that was helpful and you now know how to use Surge. That was a pretty long one, so I hope some people stuck around to the end and learned something that they didn't know about the synth. But once you kind of know how it's all laid out, it's not really that complicated. It's very powerful and the GUI is actually laid out very well. So yeah, thanks a million.